Welcome to In the Green Chair, an interview podcast series for people looking to begin or expand their career in the green economy. I'm your host, Anna Garza, and today's guest in the Green Chair is journeyman machinist and community engagement officer for Iron+Earth, Stephen Buhler.
We can really kind of all band together to demand, a better transition that actually helps workers go from working in fossil fuel industry to working in green energy, which, I think is going to be really critical if we ever want to hit any kind of net zero goal.
In this episode, we discuss Stephen's unique career journey. Stephen worked in the oil and gas industry as a journeyman machinist for the past 13 years, and he strives to transition fully into the renewable energy sector. We learn how Stephen uses his experiences as a former oil and gas worker to help his fellow fossil fuel workers also make the transition to a low-carbon future. Well, welcome to the Green Chair, Stephen. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. First of all, just how are you doing?
I'm all right. Living through a pandemic, has been a lot, but getting to work on green energy stuff has kind of been really fulfilling.
Yes, and speaking about your career path and the work that you've doing or done in the past, I know that you've worked as a journeyman machinist for the past 13 years. Can you tell me what your education and your career journey has been?
Yeah, so education for that is a pretty standard journeyman machinist process. 4 years of on-the-job training plus 2 months every year for schooling. It's trade school, so it's working with a lot of tools. And doing basic math stuff, learning a lot of the theory about machining.
Did you go straight into it after trade school, going straight into journeyman machinist?
Yeah, so I was I was working through the whole program as well. So I would do 10 months working, 2 months in school, and yeah, this was straight after high school. I was actually lucky enough to start my career in high school, kind of part-time.
Okay.
Here in Alberta, we have this thing called at the time I was in high school, I don't know if it still exists. It's called the RAP program, Registered Apprenticeship Program, and you could take 2 blocks of school and go work in a trade. And yeah, that was really helpful to kind of kickstart that, get the hours in, get some on-the-job training so I could get into NATE a little bit earlier.
That's awesome. So what jobs are available for machinists, and what does the term journeyman mean?
Yeah, it's kind of it means you've reached the highest level of training. Usually, you'll kind of differentiate apprentices by the year that they're in. So first year apprentice, second year apprentice, third year apprentice, fourth year apprentice, and then journeyman. Machining is pretty broad and a really interesting trade. The jobs are basically, if something needs to be made, generally a machinist has probably made it, if not made a part of it. So yeah, we, as a machinist, I just get given a drawing and I take a chunk of metal, turn it into something useful. So yeah, the jobs that are available, there's being in Alberta, there is a lot of oil and gas jobs. But also, there's with all the oil and gas workers that we have here, we have a real ability, and my hope is that eventually we will probably have a wealth of green energy jobs for oil and gas workers to transition into and really start working in that. So yeah, you can make parts for pipelines, you can make parts for natural gas plants, but you can also make parts for wind turbines, you can make parts for solar arrays. The possibilities are endless.
Awesome. So on the topic of the trades, so what do you think are the pros and cons of working in the trades?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the pros have been getting to actually make a part and a thing that you can really see and touch, and you could you can really see the possibility of like what you did, um, really having an effect in the world. And it's nice to. I really appreciate kind of knowing that like what I'm making is going to have some sort of material impact on the world, which is really exciting and makes me feel like I'm just at least a small part in something really big.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, yeah, even if I'm making like a little gear that goes into something, at least like I know that like the whole machine wasn't going to work without me making that gear. Um, which is really cool. And I think like in all trades, like the teamwork aspect is really cool. You're constantly learning. There's things are always changing every day. Whether it's from the product development side of the new tools that might come in through the shop, um or just the new parts that you're making. Yeah, you're kind of always you're always confronted with a new challenge pretty much every day. So like you're never really gonna be the absolute top professional, but that's okay because
Mhm.
like you get to learn every day. Um, yeah, I mean, the pay is pretty good too. And like the barrier to entry is relatively low, financially at least. Um, yeah, some of the difficulties of it definitely come from like the hours that you work, and like it's difficult, it's hard
Mhm.
work. It's a lot of lifting big heavy parts, um, as it is in all trades. There's also physical danger. um, yeah, I work with really sharp tools that cut metal.
Oh man.
So they yeah, so they can cut they will cut anything that stands in their way. They don't stop for anything or anyone. Um, but yeah, so it has its dangers, but as long as you're cognizant and paying attention and actually focused on the work that you're doing, like you can stay safe. So yeah, making sure that safety is, for me, safety's always been like a real big important thing to consider when working in trades. Like any trade that you work in, if you're walking into a job and you're applying somewhere and it just doesn't feel safe and it doesn't feel like anyone there really cares about the safety, it's probably not a place to be. Um, yeah, but yeah, and yeah, and like I guess like kind of the last thing I'll say is like there's long hours involved too. Especially when you consider like a lot of the fossil fuel side, like um it definitely requires people to be away from their families for a long time, working really long hours. 12-hour shifts are pretty common. Which thankfully I've never had to work one of those, but I've heard a lot about that. Um, yeah.
Like when I came across um, this episode wanting to talk to someone who has experience working in the oil and gas and why they've decided to transition, right off the bat the question that comes to mind is that why did you decide to leave your job in the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it was a
A
lot
big
of
question.
factors. Yeah, yeah, a lot of factors. I think like a lot of it came down to just knowing that like a change needed to happen, and I wanted to. I I'm lucky enough and privileged enough that I don't have kids, so I can make some of these more risky moves and move into to places that necessarily don't have the dependable income from oil and gas, but are still working kind of on the forefront of building the transition towards uh, green energy. Um, so yeah, I was able to uh, move into a job shop that doesn't doesn't only take work for one industry and make the same part over and over again. Um, and yeah, that just came from recognizing that like the climate is changing, and being really being really really exhausted by the every summer there being days or weeks of wildfire smoke
Yeah.
where, I'm standing at my machine and I can look out through the bay doors and it's just gray and you can't see as far as you normally can. Um, and kind of knowing that, like, well, the thing that I'm making right now, it's not stopping it.
Hmm.
um, which is like a really tough thing to grapple with. And I would never expect anyone to, to get to the same place that I was in the same amount of time. I think like everyone's on their own journey. Um, but yeah, I think like it was just like dealing with like seeing all the effects of climate change, and then also like getting involved with a local climate group here in Edmonton as well. Um, I was able to, really connect with people who also were able to show me that like environmentalists like don't hate tradespeople either, which was like a funny um, yeah, it was kind of like a funny preconceived notion that a lot of tradespeople have, is that environmentalists hate us, which is also not true.
Hmm.
Um, like uh, it was a lot of environmentalists, that's the first place that I heard about a just transition. Those are the people that have been like, pushing the idea that like they care enough about me and my coworkers and my peers that like they also want to see me thrive in a green economy. They don't want to see us all punished for working in oil and gas, because they also understand that we were all just trying to make money and that we're, just trying to live in the world as it is right now and pay our bills. Um, but they also know that, things need to change as well. And we, as tradespeople who work in oil and gas, need to be brought along to that.
So yeah, you've made this transition or are in the process of even moving more into this transition. What does it mean to you?
It I think it's like, to me, it's really been just like living my values and
Hmm.
really getting to really enact the things that I've been, talking about a lot for the past 3 or 4 years,
Hmm.
when I've been organizing with climate groups. Yeah, and it's felt really empowering as well to kind of like step out of the thing that I thought was the only possibility I have, and like I don't have to just point to the 8 hours outside of work that I'm spending organizing in climate spaces, or trying to move the idea of climate action forward. But I can also point to my day job and be like, well, I'm also, pushing for climate action from a government standpoint. And also, at my day job, I'm able to, work on things that aren't necessarily just oil and gas while living in an oil and gas province.
What I find really interesting about your work or your transitioning story is that you work for Iron+Earth, which is a worker led not for profit with a mission to empower fossil fuel industry and indigenous workers to build climate solutions. I know many people believe oil and gas workers are against renewables, but how does Iron+Earth challenge that notion?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the really like the coolest thing about Iron+Earth, is that like it is it's oil and gas workers really changing the narrative about what is possible for oil and gas workers. Often politically, we get talked about as just like only being able to work in oil and gas, which is not true and kind of unfair,
Yeah.
honestly. We are capable of like working in any industry that you get us to. It's just as long as the jobs are there and the work is there and you've given us proper instructions, like we're gonna make the thing and it's gonna work well. Um, and yeah, I think like Iron+Earth is really at a good position to help, demonstrate that by, engaging with other oil and gas workers and, helping them feel empowered to work in green renewable energy. And we can really like kind of all band together to demand, a better transition that actually helps workers um, go from working in the fossil fuel industry to working in green energy, um, which I think is, going to be really critical if we ever want to hit any kind of net zero goal.
Yeah, and I like the comment that you made about the political sphere being branded mainly as just this an oil and gas worker, and more people just focusing more on the work that you do rather than the skills that you have acquired and that you can use. So, what skills have you gained as a journeyman, and how are they transferable in the work that you do now, or just in general, how are they transferable?
Yeah, so like as a journeyman, I mean, like I think machining is like the reason why I got into machining is because it felt to me like the most transferable skill you could possibly get. It's literally just a drawing, chunk of metal, turn it into something useful, and there you go. What that something useful is could be for a wind turbine, could be for a pipeline, whatever. Doesn't really matter to me. The tools that I run, it's all the same. Um, so yeah, I think, the skills that I've learned have just been all the skills that I've learned, whether it's learning how to run a lathe, how to run a mill, how to run a bandsaw. All those skills are going to be super useful, when eventually we start making massive investments into green energy. Um, and I think, the same is for a lot of trades, really. I've talked to electricians who have said that, generally, s- you know, they generally understand how to wire up a solar panel, for example. They might need like a little extra training, and the training is definitely there for them to access it, to learn deeper about how to make those installations and how to do them properly. um, but they've got the baseline understanding pretty well down. um, and same thing with a welder too. Like, a lot of welders out there, they can burn rod into any kind of metal, and it doesn't really matter to them if they're building a windmill or welding of a pipeline. It's all the same. It just, hopefully, I think the benefit I think that we could get from working in renewable energy is a lot of that work we can do closer to home. We don't have to go weeks away from home to go stay in a camp where you have to go work on a pipeline that's in a trench underground in the muck. uh, Maybe we'll be lucky enough that we can do a lot of that work in a shop, and you only have to work 8 hours a day, and you can still go home at the end of the day, hang out with your family.
Yeah, and on the topic where you mentioned retraining, retraining oil and gas workers sounds like a great opportunity, but what challenges exist?
I think like the biggest challenge for sure is demonstrating that, like, if they take this training, that there is jobs ready for them.
Hmm.
Um, Especially being a worker in Alberta, um, under the current political climate, it's been pretty tough to really expect that we're going to get a massive solar array installed somewhere in Alberta right now. But I'm hopeful that eventually it will happen, and I mean we're gonna need to, because literally the survival of the planet relies on it. I don't think there's any like huge challenges. I think maybe the hardest challenge is like reaching oil and gas workers to make sure that they can all equitably access the training. Making sure that you're not forgetting people who maybe don't speak English as their first language, or regionally too. There's a lot of like rural workers too that it might be tough for them to come in and out of a big city for training on renewable energy.
We'll be right back. This interview series is part of the Green Collar Careers program, brought to you by Relay Education. Relay is a Canadian charity that delivers renewable energy, environmental education, and green careers programs for youth. Remember to check out our website, relayeducation.com, and social media channels at Relay Education to find out when our next interview will be posted and to find resources on how to start your green career. So, working with Iron+Earth, what does your role as a community engagement officer consist of?
As a community engagement officer, I've been working a lot with speaking with other oil and gas workers, and really trying to. Right now, we're really focused on um, really just like mapping out where oil and gas workers are standing and how they perceive the transition, and even asking them straight up, like, what do you need to make the transition? For some of them it has been training, for most of them it's jobs.
Yeah.
um, and like it's been really rewarding to uh, as someone who spent you know quite a while, a year or two being a pretty openly uh, pro green energy fossil fuel worker, um, which is actually quite uncommon in our industry, mostly because I think a lot of it comes from a concern that your employer might get upset about it. Um, but um, but I think it's been really nice to talk to a lot of these oil and gas workers and find out that, like, yeah, we're all kind of thinking the same thing. And we're all hoping for more work in renewable energy. I don't really talk to a lot of oil and gas workers who are like, no, we absolutely do not need any green renewable jobs at all. They're bad. Um, Everyone just wants more jobs. They want to have the ability to to go where they can, and hopefully they can use the extra jobs to leverage that into better wages. Um, yeah, I think every tradesperson at some level understands that, like, green jobs are good for them.
So, when you're communicating with current oil and gas workers and having these conversations, what is the general feeling around these conversations with them?
I get some people that are hopeful and some people that are not. Um, that hope really goes up and down depending on who you're talking to. Just like hope for the future, and hope for their jobs. Um, but I think, like, one thing that I can consistently say is that everybody is extremely supportive
Of
for
this.
more green energy. Yeah, and they're all, when they don't necessarily all understand the terms that people who spend a lot of time in climate spaces understand. Words like, or terms like a just transition, or even
Hmm.
Green New Deal. Those kinds of things that, like, I've talked a lot about with friends and even some coworkers. Um, but I think that messaging still hasn't quite gotten through to a lot of oil and gas workers, which I think is part of what adds um, to that. I don't know if I want to say despair,
Mm.
but concern for the future, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, that, like, you know, I think that, like, there are these ideas that, like, we have we have hopeful plans for the future. Um, and Yeah, I think, just like, once we get those ideas to oil and gas workers, a lot of them get pretty stoked. And they're pretty excited to see that, like, oh, sweet, like, there is actually hope for me on the other side of this transition. It just, might take a little bit of work, might be a little messy along the way, but, like, if everybody's got the best interest at heart and everybody is, like, really doing it in good faith, I think there's still a lot of hope.
Of course, yeah, there's a hope when you can see that the skills that you've worked so long and so hard on can be applied to something so positive. Can you tell me some key ideas of what a just transition is?
So a just transition is really looking at the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and recognizing it for the disruption that it is. That transition is going to be tough. It brings along with it its own precarities. I don't think there's any sense in trying to hide that at all. So what we in the climate movement have really started pushing for is a just transition. So making sure that justice is centered through that transition and making sure that no one gets left behind. So that means, making sure that like fossil fuel workers, um, are, not left in precarious positions without work. That means fossil fuel communities are taken care of as well. And also, making sure that indigenous rights and sovereignty are also held up too. I think it's worth understanding that like through the fossil fuel proliferation, um, it has really come at the expense of a lot of indigenous communities, and really, trampling on their rights, and the fact that this is still their land. And we really need to make sure that we're not just like building more renewable energy and replicating the colonialism that we did to build the fossil fuel industry.
When you and I spoke during our pre interview, you told me that sometimes when we reflect on our career paths, we can be limited by our imagination. You said that people need to feel like they can dream. So naturally, I want to ask you, what is your dream job?
My dream job is just anything in green energy. uh, Literally anything. I'll take it. Like I would love to like continue machining and like um yeah, like just machining some sort of green energy. I would love to work on like on a wind turbine, or a solar array project. Even a geothermal project would be super exciting to like you know work I like work on, building the parts for. Um and like those are all skills that I've learned from working in oil and gas. Especially, even considering like how a geothermal plant works, it's pumping water into the ground and bringing it back up. Well, that's exactly how a pipeline works too. We're just pumping oil, or bitumen or whatever through pipelines, and it's all just pumps and valves and seals. Those are things that I've worked on. Those are things that a lot of oil and gas workers have worked on. Exciting.
Yeah, and I want to go back again to your conversations that you have with current oil and gas workers.
Mhm.
What part of your story do you find is the most important to highlight when you're speaking with them?
Nothing really pushes people to change their stance on something quite like your personal experiences. If you can share your feelings and your experiences that you've seen and felt, like that makes it so much more real for people than just throwing facts and like telling people what the current ppm of carbon in the atmosphere is right now. I know for me, my eyes tend to glaze over when people go there. But once we start talking about like, man, it sucks that last summer we had to stay inside because it was so smoky and so hot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, while facts are important, ultimately to get people to be more aware of the issue is to follow that more value based and human approach and say, look, this is going to affect you and other generations. So, for students or individuals who are starting off their career now and want to enter into a skilled trade, what advice do you have for them?
Um, yeah, like get out there and try and get an apprenticeship. The best experience is the people who will give you experience. So start looking, if you don't have any experience working in the trade, really getting out there looking for jobs that are looking for apprentices. um you know the that's going to be your best foot in the door. um there are also opportunities as well to go into pre-employment training that you can take, which is usually like done over about 8 months to a year, and usually that'll cover like the first 2 years of your schooling for your apprenticeship, which is pretty helpful, and it looks pretty good on a resume.
No, those are great advice. And now that we're nearing the end, looking long term, I want to ask you, what does the future of oil and gas in Canada look like to you?
Um, I think for me, like my I think the future of oil and gas is, I personally hope, short. Um, you know, I hope we don't have, the same. I really hope we're not subject to more boom and bust cycles like we have been for the past 20 years for another 50 years. I really hope that we can. I think the future of oil and gas is going to be, best case scenario is like a controlled wind down, where where we're really making sure that as we're winding down projects that people are working on, we're building up new projects that people can easily move into.
Can you tell us what boom and bust cycles are?
Oh yeah. So it's it's something that I think like every Albertan just really feels a lot. But it's because so many of our jobs are tied to the price of oil, and the price of oil tends to go up and down. We've seen negative $40 a barrel a couple of years ago, but we've also seen $140 a barrel. And so when the price of oil drops, the number of jobs also drops because nobody's wanting to buy oil. No one really wants to produce it then either. But on the flip side, when oil's in high demand, everyone's trying to produce it, and there is loads of jobs. Everybody's paying the absolute best wages you can get, but it tends to not be as stable.
Yeah, and especially if there's a boom for a while, it can give a false reassurance of stability or career stability and job
Yeah,
security.
yeah. And then that can result in people taking on more loans, can result in people taking in more debt, and then when we fall into a bust, it's really tough to keep paying those debts when you have no job.
So, alternatively, how are renewables different in that sense?
Yeah, like I think the thing that renewables really offer is stability. Wind, like we're always going to need power. We're always going to be turning the lights on and off. Um, and the wind and the wind doesn't really stop blowing. The sun doesn't really stop shining. A lot of these projects and a lot of this infrastructure needs regular maintenance. Um, so, the renewable sector really has like a really positive uh, a really positive feature to it, that like it's just consistent. You're gonna have a steady paycheck, and that paycheck is you'll be able to rely on that year over year instead of week over week.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing your story. Is there anything else that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Um, yeah, I guess just, if they're interested more in working with oil and gas workers, or you personally know someone who works in oil and gas, um, send them over to Iron and Earth. We're at iron+earth.org. Um, and right now we are currently trying to talk to 100 oil and gas workers to get their perceptions on a just transition, and really help us build the groundwork for a movement of oil and gas workers to really push for a just transition that upholds Indigenous rights as well as worker rights as well. And if anyone wants to connect with me personally, you can reach out to me at steven@iron+earth.org. And yeah, I'll be happy to answer some of your questions if you've got any more, for sure.
Thanks for sitting down with us in the green chair today. Once again, I'm your host, Anna Garza, and stay tuned for our next episode to learn more about the different paths people take to working in the green economy.